Many people think programming is only for experts, but the truth is that anyone can learn Python if they practice with fun projects. One of the best ways to understand coding is by creating games from scratch, because games make learning exciting and practical at the same time. Instead of only reading theory, you can see your code come alive on the screen. Every movement, score, sound, and action happens because of the instructions you write. This gives instant feedback and helps you understand programming faster. Python is perfect for beginners because its syntax is simple, clean, and easy to read. Even if you have never written code before, you can still build simple games step by step and slowly grow your skills into advanced programming. In this journey, you are not just learning Python. You're learning problem solving, logic building, creativity, and the mindset of a programmer. When you create games, mistakes become easier to handle because every bug feels like part of the challenge rather than failure. This makes the learning process enjoyable and motivating. The first thing you need to understand is that games are made from small pieces working together. A character moving on the screen may look complicated, but behind it are simple instructions. For example, if the player presses the right arrow key, the character moves right. If the player touches an enemy, the game ends. If the player collects a coin, the score increases. Every game works through conditions, loops, variables, and functions. These are the building blocks of Python. A variable stores information like score, health, or player position. A loop repeats actions again and again, so the game keeps running. Conditions allow the game to make decisions. Functions organize code into reusable parts. Once you understand these basics, game development becomes much easier. Before creating games, you need Python installed on your computer. You can download it from the official Python website. During installation, make sure to check the option that says Add Python to Path, because it helps your computer recognize Python commands. After installation, open a code editor like VS Code, PyCharm, or even Idle, which comes with Python. Write your first line of code, print Hello World. This simple line tells Python to display text on the screen. It may look small, but it is the beginning of everything. Programming is simply giving instructions to a computer in a language it understands. Now let us create the logic of a tiny game using simple Python concepts. Imagine a guessing game where the computer chooses a secret number and the player tries to guess it. First, you import the random module because Python needs help generating random numbers. Then you create a variable to store the secret number. After that, you ask the player for input using the input function. Since input always comes as text, you convert it into a number using int. Then you compare the player's guess with a secret number using conditions. If the guess is correct, the player wins. If the guess is too high or too low, the game gives a hint. This small project teaches variables, user input, conditions, loops, and modules all at once. One of the biggest reasons games are powerful learning tools is because they force you to think logically. For example, if a player has 3 lives, you need code that reduces a life when the player makes a mistake. If lives become 0, the game should stop. This teaches you how to manage data and control the flow of your program. Many beginners struggle when they only memorize syntax without understanding why code works. Games solve this problem because every line has a visible purpose. When your character jumps, you understand the importance of coordinates and movement. When your score increases, you understand variables. When enemies appear randomly, you understand randomness and loops. After learning basic Python, the next step is creating visual games instead of text-based games. This is where the Pygame library becomes very useful. Pygame is a collection of tools that help you build games with graphics, sounds, animations, and keyboard controls. To install Pygame, you open the terminal and type pip install Pygame. Once installed, you can import Pygame into your project and create a game window. The first exciting moment is seeing your own game screen appear. Even a blank window feels amazing because you created it yourself with code. Every Pygame project begins with initialization. You start by importing Pygame and calling pygame.init. Then you create a screen with a width and height. After that, you create a game loop. The game loop is the heart of every game because it keeps the game running continuously until the player exits. Inside this loop, the game checks for events like keyboard presses or closing the window. It updates objects on the screen and redraws everything many times every second. Without the game loop, your game would open and close instantly. One beginner project is creating a moving square. You define variables for the square's position, width, height, and speed. Then you draw the square on the screen using Pygame.draw.rect. Next, you detect keyboard input using Pygame.key.get_pressed. If the player presses the left arrow key, you reduce the X position. If the player presses the right arrow key, you increase it. The same logic applies for up and down movement. Suddenly, you have a controllable object on the screen. This simple project teaches movement, coordinates, input handling, and screen updates. Another important concept in games is collision detection. Collision happens when two objects touch each other. For example, if a player collects a coin or hits an obstacle, the game needs to detect that interaction. In Pygame, rectangles can help with this because rectangles have built-in collision checking. You can create two rectangles and use CollideRect to check if they overlap. This small feature allows you to build endless types of games like racing games, platformers, shooting games, and puzzle games. As you continue learning, you begin understanding that games are built from systems working together. A scoring system tracks points. A health system tracks damage. A movement system controls characters. A sound system adds effects and music. When beginners see a finished game, they often feel overwhelmed, but every large game is simply a collection of smaller systems combined carefully. This realization removes fear and makes programming feel achievable. One common mistake beginners make is quitting when errors appear. In reality, errors are part of programming. Even professional developers face bugs every day. The difference is that experienced programmers know how to debug problems calmly. If your game crashes, read the error message carefully. Python usually tells you the exact line causing the issue. Maybe you forgot a colon, misspelled a variable, or used the wrong indentation. These small mistakes are normal. Every error teaches you something important. Over time, you become faster at finding and fixing problems. Another useful habit is building projects gradually. Do not try making a giant open-world game on your first day. Start with tiny projects. Create a number-guessing game. Then build rock, paper, scissors. After that, create a simple snake game or Pong game. Every project adds new skills. Slowly, your confidence grows because you can see your improvement clearly. Small wins are extremely important in programming because they keep motivation strong. Python also teaches you creative thinking. There is never only one way to solve a problem. Two programmers can create the same game using different methods. This freedom makes coding interesting because you can experiment with your own ideas. Maybe you add power-ups to your game. Maybe you create different enemy types. Maybe you add levels and sound effects. Every improvement teaches new programming concepts naturally. The amazing thing about learning through games is that the skills transfer to other areas too. The same Python knowledge used for games can also help in web development, automation, artificial intelligence, data science, and cybersecurity. Loops, conditions, functions, and logic are useful everywhere. Games simply make the learning process more exciting and memorable. Instead of feeling like homework, coding feels like building something fun and interactive. As you practice more, you will notice your mindset changing. Problems that once looked impossible become manageable because you learn how to break them into smaller parts. This is one of the most valuable skills in programming and in life. A large challenge becomes easier when divided into smaller steps. Game development trains your brain to think this way naturally because every feature is built piece by piece. When you start creating more advanced games in Python, you begin understanding how important planning is before writing code. Many beginners jump directly into coding without thinking about the structure of the game. This often leads to confusion later because the project becomes messy and difficult to manage. A better approach is to first imagine how the game should work. Think about the player, enemies, scoring system, game rules, and controls. Even a small sketch on paper can help organize your ideas. Professional developers spend time planning because it saves many hours during development. Once you know what you want to build, writing code becomes smoother and more organized. One of the best beginner game projects is the classic Snake game because it teaches many important concepts together. In Snake, the player controls a snake moving around the screen while eating food. Every time the snake eats food, it grows longer. The game ends if the snake touches the wall or itself. Although the game looks simple, it contains movement, collision detection, score tracking, loops, conditions, and object management. First, you create the game window and define colors for the snake, food, and background. Then you create variables for the snake's position and direction. The snake continuously moves inside the game loop. Keyboard input changes the movement direction. Random food positions are generated using the random module. Every time the snake reaches the food, the score increases and the snake grows longer. Through this single project, beginners learn how multiple systems work together inside a real game. Another excellent beginner project is Pong. Pong is one of the earliest video games ever made. It consists of a ball bouncing between two paddles. The player controls one paddle while the computer or another player controls the other. This project teaches movement physics and collision response. The ball moves with X and Y speed values. When it touches the top or bottom wall, its vertical direction changes. When it hits a paddle, the horizontal direction changes. You also learn how to create a simple artificial intelligence system for the computer paddle. The computer can follow the ball's position automatically. This introduces the idea that game characters can react to events using logic written in code. As your projects grow larger, functions become extremely important. Beginners sometimes write all code inside one long section, which quickly becomes difficult to understand. Functions solve this problem by dividing code into reusable blocks. For example, you can create one function for drawing the player, another for updating movement, and another for checking collisions. This makes the code cleaner and easier to edit later. If you want to change how the player moves, you only edit one function instead of searching through the entire program. Organized code is one of the biggest differences between beginners and experienced programmers. You will also learn about game states. A game usually has different screens like the main menu, gameplay screen, pause menu, and game over screen. Instead of creating separate programs for each screen, developers use game states. A variable can store the current state of the game. For example, if the state is menu, the game shows the start screen. If the state is playing, the game runs normally. If the state is game over, the game displays the final score and restart option. This system helps manage complex games efficiently. One exciting moment in game development is adding sound effects and music. Sound makes games feel alive and engaging. Even simple sound effects can improve the player experience greatly. Pygame allows you to load sound files and play them during events. For example, a coin collection sound can play when the player gains points. A crashing sound can play when the game ends. Background music can create mood and excitement. Audio teaches beginners that games are not only about visuals, but also about atmosphere and emotional experience. Animations are another important part of game development. Animation simply means showing multiple images quickly to create movement. A walking character may use different images for each step. By changing these images repeatedly inside the game loop, the character appears animated. Beginners often feel surprised when they realize animation is just a sequence of images displayed very fast. Understanding this concept makes game design less mysterious and more practical. Many beginners eventually want to create platformer games similar to Mario. Platformers introduce gravity and jumping mechanics. Gravity constantly pulls the player downward, while jumping temporarily pushes the player upward. This requires velocity systems and collision handling with platforms. Building a platformer teaches physics concepts in a simple and enjoyable way. You learn how objects move naturally and how games simulate real-world behavior using math and logic. Even basic physics can make your games feel much more realistic and satisfying. Another important skill is learning how to use assets properly. Assets include images, sounds, fonts, and background music. You do not always need to create everything yourself. Many websites provide free game assets for beginners. Using assets teaches file handling and project organization. You learn how to load images into Python, resize them, display them on the screen, and manage resources efficiently. Organized folders become important because larger projects can contain many files. At some point, you will face performance issues. Maybe your game becomes slow when too many objects appear on the screen. This introduces optimization. Optimization means making your code run more efficiently. For example, instead of loading images repeatedly inside the game loop, you load them once before the loop starts. Small improvements like this can make games smoother and faster. Beginners learn that writing code is not only about making something work, but also about making it work efficiently. Debugging becomes an even more valuable skill during larger projects. Sometimes the game may not crash, but something behaves incorrectly. Maybe the player passes through walls, or the score updates incorrectly. In such cases, printing variable values can help identify the problem. This is called debugging with print statements. More advanced developers also use debugging tools inside code editors, but print debugging remains one of the simplest and most effective methods for beginners. One thing many people do not realize is that game development teaches patience. Building games takes time because every feature requires testing and adjustment. A player movement system may need several improvements before it feels smooth. Enemy behavior may need balancing to make the game challenging but fair. This process teaches persistence and careful thinking. Every improvement, no matter how small, moves the project closer to completion. As your confidence grows, you may start creating your own game ideas instead of following tutorials exactly. This is a major step in becoming a real programmer. Tutorials are useful for learning techniques, but creativity develops when you build original projects. Even simple custom ideas help strengthen problem-solving skills because you must think independently. Maybe you create a space shooter where enemies attack in waves. Maybe you build a racing game with increasing speed. Maybe you design a puzzle game with unique mechanics. Every original idea forces your brain to connect programming concepts in new ways. Learning Python through games also builds motivation because you can share your creations with friends and family. People may not understand lines of code, but they immediately understand a playable game. Showing your projects to others feels rewarding and encourages further learning. You can even upload games online and receive feedback from players around the world. This creates a sense of achievement that keeps many beginners motivated for years. Another important lesson is that every programmer learns at a different speed. Some people understand loops quickly but struggle with functions. Others understand game logic easily but find debugging difficult. Comparing yourself constantly with others can reduce motivation. The most important thing is consistent practice. Even 1 hour of coding daily can lead to huge improvement over time. Programming is like learning a language or instrument. Regular practice matters more than speed. Game development can eventually open career opportunities as well. Some people become indie game developers and publish their own games. Others use their Python skills in software engineering, web development, automation, or artificial intelligence. The problem-solving mindset gained through game development becomes useful in many industries. Even if you never become a professional game developer, the experience of building games gives valuable technical and creative skills. The journey from beginner to skilled programmer does not happen overnight. Every expert once struggled with simple mistakes and confusing errors. What separates successful learners is persistence. They keep experimenting, building, fixing, and improving. Games make this process enjoyable because every project feels like creating something meaningful rather than simply studying theory. Each finished game becomes proof of your progress and a reminder that you're growing step by step as a programmer. As you continue learning Python by creating games, you eventually reach a stage where you stop thinking only like a player and start thinking like a developer. When you play games now, you begin noticing systems behind the scenes. You observe how menus work, how enemies move, how scoring systems are designed, and how levels become more difficult over time. This change in thinking is very important because it trains your brain to analyze and understand software design. Every game becomes a learning opportunity. Even simple mobile games can teach useful lessons about mechanics, timing, user experience, and visual feedback. One of the most valuable concepts in game development is the idea of a game loop running continuously. At first, beginners may think a game works like a normal Python script that starts and ends once. In reality, games constantly repeat actions many times every second. During each cycle of the game loop, the program checks player input, updates positions, detects collisions, and redraws the screen. This process happens so quickly that the player experiences smooth movement and interaction. Understanding the game loop is like understanding the heartbeat of every game. Once this idea becomes clear, many other game programming concepts become easier to understand. As your projects become more advanced, you begin working with classes and object-oriented programming. At first, these concepts may sound difficult, but they are actually very practical in games. A class is like a blueprint for creating objects. For example, you can create a player class that contains information about health, position, speed, and movement methods. You can also create enemy classes with their own behaviors. Instead of writing separate code repeatedly for every object, classes allow you to organize and reuse code efficiently. This becomes extremely useful when creating larger games with many characters and objects. Imagine creating a shooting game where multiple enemies appear on the screen. Without classes, you would need to manage each enemy separately, which becomes messy very quickly. With classes, you can create one enemy blueprint and generate many enemies easily. Each enemy can have its own position and movement while still sharing the same structure. This teaches an important programming lesson called scalability. Good code should remain manageable even when projects grow larger. Another exciting part of game development is creating enemy behavior. Enemies are not just random moving objects. They follow logic created by the developer. Some enemies may chase the player directly. Others may move in patterns or attack from a distance. This introduces basic artificial intelligence concepts. Even simple enemy behavior can make a game feel challenging and interesting. For example, an enemy may follow the player if the distance becomes small enough. Another enemy may patrol back and forth until the player enters its area. These systems are built entirely using conditions, loops, and variables. Level design is another area where creativity and logic work together. A good game level is not only visually interesting, but also balanced and enjoyable to play. Beginners often create levels that are either too easy or impossibly difficult. Over time, you learn how to guide players naturally through challenges. You understand how obstacles, rewards, and enemy placement affect the overall experience. This process improves creative thinking because game design combines art, psychology, and programming together. Saving game progress is another useful skill you may learn. Many games allow players to save scores, levels, or settings. In Python, this can be done using files. For example, you can save the highest score inside a text file and load it again when the game starts. This introduces file handling concepts like reading and writing data. Suddenly, your game feels more professional because player progress is remembered between sessions. One important lesson in game development is understanding frame rate. Frame rate refers to how many times the screen updates every second. If a game updates too slowly, movement appears laggy. If it updates too quickly, gameplay may become inconsistent on different computers. Pygame allows developers to control frame rate using a clock system. This ensures smoother gameplay and consistent speed across devices. Learning about frame rate teaches beginners that game development involves both creativity and technical precision. As your confidence increases, you may start adding visual effects to your games. Particle effects, explosions, screen shaking, and lighting can make simple games feel much more exciting. Even small effects can greatly improve the player experience. For example, when a player defeats an enemy, adding a small explosion animation and sound effect makes the action feel rewarding. These details may seem minor, but they strongly affect how enjoyable a game feels. Many beginners eventually become interested in multiplayer games. Multiplayer introduces communication between players through networks. Although advanced networking can be challenging, simple multiplayer concepts help explain how online games work. Even creating a local two-player game on the same keyboard teaches coordination between multiple game objects and input systems. Understanding multiplayer concepts opens doors to larger and more ambitious projects in the future. One major challenge beginners face is losing motivation during difficult moments. Sometimes bugs take hours to fix. Sometimes a feature refuses to work correctly despite many attempts. This experience is completely normal in programming. The key is learning how to approach problems patiently instead of becoming frustrated immediately. Experienced programmers rarely solve everything instantly. They experiment, test different ideas, search for patterns, and slowly narrow down the issue. Every difficult bug solved improves your understanding and builds confidence. Another useful habit is reading other people's code. Many beginner developers only focus on writing their own projects, but reading existing code can teach new techniques and improve understanding. Open-source Python games are especially valuable because you can study how experienced developers organize their projects. You may discover cleaner methods, better structures, or creative ideas you never considered before. Learning from others is a major part of becoming a stronger programmer. As you create more games, you will naturally improve typing speed and coding fluency. At first, even simple programs may feel slow to write because every line requires careful thinking. Over time, common patterns become familiar. You no longer need to think deeply about every loop or condition. This allows your brain to focus more on design and creativity instead of syntax alone. Programming starts feeling more natural and enjoyable. One exciting milestone is completing your first fully playable game. It does not need advanced graphics or complex mechanics. Even a small finished project is extremely valuable because it proves you can turn ideas into reality through code. Many beginners start projects but never finish them. Completing games teaches discipline and project management. It also creates a portfolio of work you can share online or use when applying for opportunities in technology fields. Game development also teaches communication skills indirectly. If you work with others, you must explain ideas clearly, organize tasks, and solve problems together. Larger games are often built by teams including programmers, artists, sound designers, and writers. Learning how to collaborate becomes an important skill for future careers. Even solo developers benefit from writing clear and organized code because it becomes easier to understand later. You may eventually discover that programming is not only about technology, but also about